This is March 2023. It'll be St. Patrick's Day at the end of the week. And that has served to remind me of another St. Patrick's Day in South America back in 1986. I took off on a trip, and the story I'm going to narrate now will explain it all. I wrote this story for a memoir competition over 10 years ago, I'd say, and it was shortlisted, but eventually didn't really win top prizes. Anyway, the story had a different title at the time. This time I'm going to call it In Peril in Peru. And it goes like this. Googling idly one day, I discovered Burundanga and realized that 30 years before I had been a zombie, a Burundangiado, and had wronged a friend. Back then, I booked a flight to South America. I felt I had to get away from it all. 6 months' absence from my bookshop and publishing business seemed extreme to those that needed to be told. My cover, I had a book to write. It even had a working title, The Green Gringo. But at the bottom of it all, I felt I had a very competent staff who could well do without me, and I needed to go off and do some substantial putting back together. There had been lots of recent trauma. Apart from the stresses of surviving recession-ridden Ireland in the 1980s, my marriage broke up and both my parents passed away prematurely. Grief, I found very difficult. But I sort of coped. The abrupt departure of my wife, however, was a near killer, and I was struggling, really. In almost divorceless Ireland, I was in the limbo of a separation agreement, and opportunities for new relationships in a small provincial town were bleak. I needed change. A big, adventurous, turn one's life on its head kind of long break stroke holiday. Thus, the tickets to far off South America. However, a month before I was to depart for the New World, I did meet someone. In a surprisingly short time, I felt that she could be the one. Life opened up, blossomed. Even marriage again seemed a possibility. So, should I go or should I stay? In the circumstances, it would be a bigger wrench. But I did decide to go. There was no need now, obviously, to go in search of romance, but the promise of adventure and exotic places had irrevocably insinuated itself. There was also an awakened, gnawing aspiration to write a book. And, of course, it would be a test. If our feelings for each other could survive a 6-month separation, it would bode well. She promised to wait for me. I love you so much, Jim. I needed to hear that. She and I hugged and kissed 6 months' worth at the airport, and I determined to be as faithful as a knight errant. Rio at carnival time was the starting point. I wrote in my pristine notebook of the startling, shocking contrast between snow and icebound northern Europe and hot Rio at 45 degrees and absurd humidity. The colour, the glamour, the squalidness, the sex steaminess, the danger, the murders. I was inspired, distracted. My pen flew over dozens of pages a day. My own domestic troubles were fast retreating. It was already working. I remained, according to my resolve, saintly aloof from indulging in Rio's carnal pleasures. It didn't count to be kissed by a line of voluptuous carnival performers on the street. Those eyes, those lips, those bodies. And apart from the effects of the odd overindulgence in drink, I had a clear head and eye with my Nikon camera to acutely observe. I phoned the one every few days and wrote at least a weekly letter. A quick trip down to Buenos Aires confirmed that the Paris of the South was indeed a beautiful place, with splendid colonial buildings, plazas and parks. And, despite the junta and strikes, there was still a lively, if dated, social scene. Almost against my will, I ended up watching Out of Africa in a very grand cinema, with a dress circle where people still wore formal evening wear, sandwiched between two lovely chicas. The Irish green card played very well in Argentina. We held hands innocently. The chaperone was in the row behind. There's a lot more I could say about that trip to Argentina, but I'll save that again for another day. Some months were spent traversing the Pantanal, the Mato Grosso, and the amazing Amazonas, the region of the Amazon. I drifted for days down the Rio Madeira, chased yacarés at night, crocodiles, with drunken Indians, and swam in the opaque, muddy Amazon, risking the scary, penis-penetrating Kendiru. A boozy St. Patrick's night, accidentally ending in a portside bar with a compatriot, was a staunch trial of my gallant ambition. I encountered. Okay. Kissed. Okay. Deep down the throat kissed. There was drink taken. A very, very beautiful Zambo woman. I had to claim I was gay to save her pride and my honour. Her hot kisses, dark coals of eyes and jaguar-like grace, still haunts me in my dreams today. Every few days I was able to phone home and touch base with the one. We cried and laughed and sighed and simulated kisses. I told her I loved her. I told her I would be faithful to her. I flew south to Santiago. I wasn't expecting a lot from another junta-ridden society, but as the axiom has it, the trains run on time under fascism. And no petty street crime, just like Belfast in the 80s and 90s. So it was a joy to eat and drink in the city and look at and chat up, but of course not touch, within limits, the cool Chileno girls. I ticked off the great sights of northern Chile, the Atacama, the Valley of the Moon, the high volcano El Tatio and its geysers. Chuquicamata copper mine, the largest man-made hole in the world, and many, many more. Night skies of sparkling southern hemisphere galaxies and constellations, all were hopefully, interestingly and entertainingly recorded in the swelling number of my completed notebooks and photographs. Finally, the last but most anticipated destination on my itinerary, Peru. That fascinating country unrolled before me. The mysterious Nazca Desert drawings, beloved of the nutty Erich von Daniken. I shouldn't complain, I sold hundreds and hundreds of his books. The glorious, ever-smoking El Misti, the white-walled colonial city of Arequipa, and then, finally, the navel of the Inca Empire, Cusco itself. I dutifully trekked the Inca Trail, visited Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and the rest. But I so held my breath over the imminent homecoming that I could only experience the world around me as a fleeting tableau. Everything sounded good from home. The one and I were aching to see one another again. There were only 3 weeks to go. I was feeling quite proud of myself. Half a year, half a continent, so many great experiences, temptations, almost all that mattered, conquered. Soon I would return to reap my just reward. Only one more major port of call, Lima, and then home. The fortress-like state of the German-owned hostel I chose to stay at on the Avenida de Arequipa should have forewarned me about the dire security state of the Peruvian capital. The unequivocal cautions in bold black in the Traveller's Bible, the South American handbook, should have been another. But at this stage, after all I had been through, I felt streetwise enough to tackle any old common or garden third world city centre. The German couple I had a drink with on my first night at the hostel gave me, actually insisted I take, a furry textured money belt to wear next the skin. I thought them a little paranoid, perhaps even kinky. I went to bed early on my first night. There was a curfew from 10 p.m. I woke shortly after to the sound of bangs. Gunfire? I looked out the barred window and saw cars speeding down the wide avenida. The front one, an open-topped 1960s American gas guzzler, had about 6 people in it, 2 of whom were firing pistols at their pursuers. The second car was a saloon of similar provenance to the first, and its passengers were firing at the car in front, and also the car behind. The third, again an open top, mostly had uniformed men, and they were all firing guns at the car in front. This was total Keystone Cop stuff, I thought, especially as I didn't see anybody being hit. Could it have been a film set? The illusion was quickly shattered when a bullet splintered my window ledge. I closed the steel shutters muy rapido, and after a while I slept, and slept surprisingly well. At breakfast I told my hostess what I'd seen. Ach, so it is the polici, the fighting with one another, and Sendera Luminosa and those people over drugs and prostitution rackets. The dumb government sacked half the polici for corruption, but they just kept going, what they normally do. But now they shoot at the normal polici as well. Ach, this country is verrückt. I needed to go to the city centre and the bank. Feeling somewhat infected with German paranoia, I put my passport and traveller's checks into the funny, furry money belt. It tickled my belly under my t-shirt. After breakfast, I caught a cheap communal taxi, a collectivo, into the city centre. The Plaza de Armas was a popular place to promenade and was thronged. The steps to the bank were packed with money-changing hustlers, and there were many others there too, intently scanning the passing crowds. My antennae were twitching. It was a bit unsettling. I decided to dodge into the basilica opposite the bank. Take a breather. I bought a bottle of water from a vendor at the door. The main business of the church was the veneration of the cross of Fra Pedro Urraca, a 16th century champion of the poor. There was a long queue waiting to kiss the relic of the cross. I joined the line of mostly Indian worshippers. My thoughts were to suspend my pinko atheist skepticism and show solidarity with the locals. When my turn came, I kissed the relic and stuffed a few impressive-looking Inti notes into the collection box. I found a seat down the nave of the church and sat there. I felt good. I thought of the one. I took a swig of water. I smelled or tasted incense. I felt suffused with a feeling of well-being. Jesus, I was having a vision. The kindly, swarthy face of Fra Urraca floated in front of me. He spoke in plummy English. He sounded like Richard Burton. My dear James, you have come a long way. You are hoping for guidance. Well, listen to your heart. Delay no longer, my son. Take that good woman to wife. She will be the light of your life. I felt deliriously happy. Everything was clear. I smelled dust, soil. Why was I lying on the floor? Why couldn't I move? Who or what was I anyway? Why was I naked? Everything felt wrong. I didn't know then, but I'd been burandangoed. When I came to, my jeans and underpants were around my ankles. I was bollock naked in a church. The money belt, the furry, funny money belt, was gone. I stood up, shakily clutching the rails of the pews, and stumbled my way to the aisle. I stared at the impassive faces of an Indian couple a few rows back. Their eyes refused to meet mine. I shuffled for several yards towards the exit before it dawned on me that it might be easier to walk if I pulled up my jeans. Nobody made eye contact. My nether regions had been studiously ignored. Not that there was much to look at anyway. It was as if I'd drifted into the spirit world. Outside the church, still clutching my unbelted jeans and scrunched up underpants, I hadn't yet figured how to dress myself properly. And I began to search the litter bins for my belongings. A policeman came up to me, muttered something in quick Spanish, and moved off. A small, wiry man, somehow familiar, stopped and asked in English, "Okay, gringo?" I tried to tell him what happened. My voice was slow and slurred, like that of a drunk. He seemed to take a long time to understand. He kept repeating, 1,300 US dollar traveler's checks and $100 cash. The amounts I told him had been stolen. Decenas de miles intis, millones de soles. He seemed almost as shocked as I was. Pepe, he told me. Pepe Caramanduca. Caramanduca come from ship I on when I kid. I help you report to police and maybe possible get passport and plata back. He offered to take me to a notario publico to prepare the documentos properly. I somehow still had enough sense to ask him how much I would have to pay him. Just a few dollars. When you get plata again. That sounded very reasonable. It was a relief to leave everything to Pepe. I was definitely not firing on all cylinders. He was now, I was confident, mi amigo. Jaime, have you more papers, money at hotel? He asked. We took a collectivo back to the hostel. The security guard there took one look at Pepe and wouldn't let him in. I found a list in my rucksack I'd been advised to make. It had my passport number and all traveller check denominations and numbers. I'd been careful about that. My German hostess asked me what I was doing with such a mensch. I explained that I'd been robbed and that he was helping me. She was aghast. When are you leaving? She asked. Well, I don't know, I said. It depends on when I can get a reissued passport and money wired from Thomas Cook. You must leave now, Irlandische, she testily demanded. Bitch. So much for Euro solidarity. I left. Pepe put me up. He lived in a tin shack in a barrio. The next days were a blur. We visited the notario several times. All this, he and Pepe assured me, was for the police report and insurance claim. Eventually, the notario told me to contact the Irish consul for a passport replacement. The consul, an honorary one, turned out to be the manager of a tire depot outside the city limits and hadn't seen an Irish person in years. The new passport had to come from Buenos Aires. It would take weeks. I should have been worried that I might miss my booked return flight to Ireland from Lima, but I was elated. Nothing fazed me any longer. Thomas Cook came up trumps, and I got an emergency $300 of traveller's checks to tide me over. Pepe kindly offered to go and pay the notario, who had been good enough to trust me until some money came through. "Give me the Thomas Cooks, and I will get the most inties for your dollars exchange in the whole of Peru, honey," Pepe assured me. I gave him the signed over checks, and he headed off into El Centro. He didn't get back that evening until late. He was fairly drunk, but he had some good news for me. He wanted me to meet a policeman who might be able to get my passport back. I thought that was a great idea. So we headed back into Lima. The policeman and a colleague were waiting in a backroom bar. They had no English, so Pepe did all the talking. They did not seem, however, to be the best of friends to Pepe. If anything, they seemed threatening towards him. But when Pepe turned to me, he was all smiles. It was then that it dawned on me. He looked so much like Charlie Chaplin. The small frame, twinkling eyes, the Hitler tash, the quick, confident movements. I threw my arms around him. "Pepe, you're the spitting image of Charlie Chaplin." Pepe squirmed and smiled a Chaplin-esque smile. "Jaime, mi gringo amigo. The policeman can help us, but we give him $100. That sounds good, Pepe. Fantastic. If we get the passport back, then there'll be no doubt about me making my scheduled flight. Great." He gave the money to the policeman. He still had the rest of my money. I could trust him, though. He was now my banker. Gringo, there is other thing. In Peru, we make business deal. We drink pisco and make fun with chicas. La policia's no good place. It wasn't far away, and we were warmly received. The girls, in my eyes, were all beautiful. We sat around and drank wine and pisco, and I was so excited, and not a little drunk. I couldn't make up my mind. Pepe chose for me. She was a tall, black girl, and she quickly led me to her room and undressed me in seconds. It was delicious. My first time in months. And first with a coloured girl. She was gorgeous. I revelled in her coffee-coloured body. The policemen, half-dressed, presumably having done their own business, came in to look. They were good sports and urged us both on to even greater exertions, slapping my backside enthusiastically. They bawled drunkenly. Pepe came to the door. He too was in his underwear. He was not smiling his Chaplin smile anymore, and he spoke, I thought, too sharply to the policeman. The one who had taken the money exploded with what I guessed were curses, ran at Pepe, pinioned his arms, and threw him across the other bed in the room. They ripped off his underpants, then took turns giving him romper la flor, as they have it. It was hard to make out whether his toothy grin was a grin or a grimace, but I thought he was enjoying it. He had, after all, been a sailor. The next morning, in Pepe's shack, I wanted to talk about nothing else, only the beautiful woman I was with the night before, and the fun we all had. Pepe was not in quite such good spirits. He was definitely not enthusiastic when I suggested we should go there again that night. The chicas were ugly, gringo. We go better place tonight. No policemen. But have no money left. The $300 she gone. I went into Lima that morning and went again to the Thomas Cook office. The manager came out. He asked me how I'd got through $300 so quickly. That's a lot of money in Peru, he said. I told him about the night before. He questioned me about the notario, Pepe, and the police. He was angry and muttered something about ladrones. He asked me the telephone number of my consul. I gave it to him. He made a call. He told me to come into his back office. He ordered in a breakfast from the local cafe. It was delicious. He left me there and told me to wait. I thought I heard the click of a key in the door as he went out. Anyway, some time later the consul arrived. He said he would like me to come stay with him. Oh, I love that idea, I told him. As long as I can come back any time and party with Pepe and his friends. We went to Pepe's place. He wasn't in. We took my belongings. I left a note. The consul's house was posh. It was a typical Spanish colonial house with rooms and balconies arranged around a central open area with a fountain and tropical greenery. His wife was very gracious and obviously a great cook. We ate sumptuously. Their two teenage daughters were very sweet and bright and were learning English. They wanted to know everything about Europe, Ireland. They were a rapt audience for my literary and other outpourings in English. They flirted with me day after day, evening after evening, but Mama was never far away to ensure I kept to the correct pupil-teacher behaviour. I almost completely forgot about Pepe and the dusky woman. I kept thinking I should ring home and talk to the one, but somehow I lacked a sense of urgency about that, and I did not make the effort. I enjoyed those last weeks in Peru. I slept like a baby, and it was so nice to let others take control of my life. All too soon, my passport arrived, and there was just a week left before I was due to leave for Europe. The consul brought me to the Thomas Cook office, and I drew out a few $100. In the city, I spent more than half buying gifts for the consul's family. I returned to the travel office and gave the manager a bottle of Irish whiskey. He blushed with pleasure. It was so unfortunate, he said, that you were robbed not once but twice, Signor. You were led astray. A simple report to the special tourist police was all that was really needed. Please do not think of us unkindly. Do not think of us all as savages. I did not go back to find Pepe. It had finally dawned on me that he had not been exactly mi amigo. If I hadn't been rescued by the good guys, I reckon I'd probably have ended up, when the money stopped coming, as one more dead tourist, blamed most likely on Sendero Luminoso, the left-wing guerrillas. On my second last morning in South America, I phoned Ireland and got through to the one. I confirmed that I would be back in a few days and apologised for the gap in communication. The line was bad, but I could just about hear her say, "Not to worry, it's okay. We'll talk when you're back." I flew to Holland, then to London, and then on to Cork. She met me at the airport. I was more or less back to normal by this time. I was excited to see her. She looked lovely in a light, flower-speckled summer dress. She drove me home. I expected she would stay, but no, she had to take her mother to some urgent appointment and would see me in the morning. I didn't really mind because I was I was so jet-lagged. I was worn out. And it felt that it would be sensible to have a good rest. And in any case, we we now had all the time in the world. She called around 11 o'clock the following morning. I was still asleep. She let herself in, made me a slap of breakfast and brought it to the bed. I was so hungry for a traditional Irish. It was beautiful. I tucked in with gusto. She began to tell me her news. I jumped ahead in my imagination, picturing a shower together after breakfast and how we would make frantic love in bed for the rest of the day. But the news was not good for me. She'd met someone else. Our relationship was toast. I then tried to make her jealous, angry, anything. With the Black Girl episode and others. But it was as if I didn't exist. Time for me to step aside, become invisible. Breakfast had become a last supper. I went out that night and got very drunk. And I repeated that several times. Life moved on. Memories had to be shelved. The accidental recent discovery of having been a Burundango victim has led me to explore the fogged up memories of that episode. Some things have become more clear. Most obvious now is that I had probably got poor Pepe all wrong. We had become quite friendly, and he maybe had proven to be the ultimate friend. For Christ's sakes, as the Americans say, he'd taken one in the ass from me. Pepe, it's a long time coming. I'm deeply sorry. I regret ever thinking you were a ladrone, a salvage. A rogue, yes, but a lovable and honourable one. I hope you're well, mi amigo. The many notebooks and photographs of my South American adventures gathered dust in the attic. The envisaged book, The Green Gringo, never made it to the front burner. But you know, thinking again about Pepe, maybe. A note. Burundango, a substance including scopolamine, I suppose, and other alkaloids derived from the datura plant, the tree that drives people mad. It's odorless and tasteless. The extract, sometimes called the zombie drug, is implicated in hundreds of robberies, rapes, and murders in South America. It can be given in liquids, foods, impregnated on cards, or just puffed at the victim's face. Colombian doctors say Burundanga preparations produce a perfect chemical hypnosis whereby the subject becomes totally suggestible and, while seeming to retain consciousness, loses any memory of subsequent events. In some of the cases, the Burundanga casualties were not just the victims of crimes, but also their perpetrators. A US senator and his wife reported that, presumably under its influence, they had spent a night withdrawing huge amounts of money from cash dispensers and handing it to a gang of thieves. A well-known diplomat vanished for 3 days, only to reappear at Santiago airport in Chile in the company of a woman he didn't know, carrying a suitcase full of cocaine. This one, however, takes the biscuit. A backpacker in Peru lost 4 days and all his belongings after accepting a biscuit on a night bus. He woke up in hospital 800 miles away. The bus wasn't even going there. Shinawil for now.